In medieval Damascus, survival was not a battle against invading armies or winter cold, but against the sun itself. Summer heat ruled the land with ruthless consistency, draining strength, drying soil, and punishing even small mistakes. Yet crops still grew, and farmers endured. Their survival depended not on strength alone, but on discipline, timing, and a deep understanding of heat as a daily enemy. In medieval Damascus, heat was not an occasional hardship, but the permanent background of life. Summers stretched for months, with cloudless skies and temperatures that pushed the human body toward exhaustion long before midday. Rainfall was scarce and unreliable, arriving mainly in cooler seasons, which meant farmers spent most of the year working land that was already dry and fragile. This climate left no room for error. A missed irrigation cycle, a poorly timed harvest, or a day of overexertion could result in crop failure or physical collapse. For farmers, the heat shaped not only how they worked, but how they thought. The land was never treated as something to dominate. Instead, it was approached as a living system with strict limits. Fields were planned with the assumption that water would be precious and that the sun would be merciless. Tools, routines, and even expectations were adjusted downward to match reality. Yield was important, but survival was more so. Heat exhaustion was a constant threat, especially during peak summer months when the ground itself radiated warmth. Farmers learned to recognize early signs of danger: dizziness, slowed movement, and confusion. Ignoring these signs could mean death far from shade or water. Over time, this awareness became instinctive. In Damascus, adaptation to heat was not a strategy, it was a condition of existence, accepted and respected from childhood. In the heat of medieval Damascus, water determined everything. Fields were not arranged for convenience or ownership boundaries, but for access to flowing water. Irrigation canals, some tracing their origins back centuries, carried life from rivers and springs into carefully divided plots. Underground channels reduced evaporation, protecting precious water from the sun before it reached the crops. Managing these systems required cooperation, discipline, and constant maintenance. Water distribution followed strict schedules. Farmers knew exactly when their plots would receive flow and for how long. Taking more than one's share was not only socially condemned but dangerous, as it threatened the survival of the entire community. Control of water was control of life, and disputes over access could decide whether families endured the summer or faced hunger. Crops were planted according to water reach, not ideal soil. Some fields accepted lower yields simply because they lay farther from canals. Others were rotated or left fallow to conserve moisture in the ground. Irrigation was never excessive. Flooding fields wasted water and weakened roots. Instead, slow, deliberate watering allowed soil to absorb moisture deeply, protecting plants during the hottest days. In Damascus, farming knowledge was inseparable from hydrology. Understanding how water moved through land, stone, and soil was as important as knowing how to sow seeds. Without water mastery, no strength or effort could overcome the sun. In medieval Damascus, time itself became a survival tool. Farmers did not organize their day by clocks or formal schedules, but by the movement of heat across the sky. Work began before sunrise, when the air was still cool and the soil retained traces of night moisture. These early hours were the most productive, reserved for the heaviest tasks such as ploughing, lifting water, or harvesting. As the sun climbed higher, labour slowed deliberately. By late morning, when shadows shortened and the ground began to radiate heat upward, activity was reduced or stopped entirely. Midday was understood as a dangerous interval, not a sign of laziness. Resting during the hottest hours preserved strength and prevented heat collapse. Farmers sought shade, drank sparingly, and allowed their bodies to cool naturally. Work often resumed in the late afternoon or early evening when the sun's intensity weakened. Tasks during this time were lighter and more precise, such as repairing channels or tending plants rather than heavy digging. This rhythm protected the body over long summers, allowing farmers to endure months of extreme heat without exhaustion. By aligning labour with temperature rather than daylight alone, medieval farmers transformed time into a form of protection. Survival depended not on working longer, but on knowing exactly when not to work. Crop selection in medieval Damascus was an act of caution rather than ambition. Farmers favoured plants that could endure prolonged heat and limited water, even if those crops produced lower yields. Barley replaced thirstier grains, while olives and dates thrived in conditions that would destroy more delicate plants. Survival demanded reliability, not abundance. Fields were planted with an understanding that failure was always possible. Choosing resilient crops reduced risk and stabilized food supply across harsh summers. These plants developed deep root systems that reached moisture hidden far below the surface, allowing them to withstand long dry periods. Farmers respected these natural strengths instead of forcing unsuitable crops to grow. Diversity was another form of protection. By growing multiple heat-tolerant crops, farmers ensured that if one failed, others might survive. This strategy reduced dependence on a single harvest and guarded against famine. Seasonal cycles were carefully observed, and planting times adjusted to avoid the most punishing heat during Geo's early growth stages. In Damascus, agriculture was shaped by restraint. Farmers accepted the limits imposed by climate and worked within them. Their success lay not in fighting the environment, but in selecting crops that had already learned how to endure the sun. In the agricultural landscape surrounding Damascus, shade was treated as a form of infrastructure rather than a luxury. Farmers understood that direct sunlight did not only exhaust the body, but also damage soil and crops. Trees were planted deliberately along field edges, irrigation channels and paths, creating a moving bands of shadow that shifted throughout the day. These trees reduced evaporation, cooled the ground, and offered brief refuge for workers. Stone walls and earthen embankments served a similar purpose. Built for irrigation control or boundary marking, they also cast long shadows during the hottest hours. Farmers planned tasks near these structures when the sun was highest, using shade to slow heat buildup in their bodies. In open fields, temporary shelters made from cloth or reeds were erected, providing minimal but essential protection. Shade extended the working season and preserved strength. Even a short rest in shadow could prevent heat sickness or fatal exhaustion. The presence of shade also protected tools, water containers, and harvested crops from rapid drying or spoilage. In a land ruled by sun, shadow became a quiet ally. It replaced artificial cooling with thoughtful design, proving that survival often depended on understanding how to work with light rather than against it. Clothing in medieval Damascus was designed not for decoration, but for survival under extreme heat. Farmers wore loose-fitting garments that allowed air to circulate freely around the body. This airflow helped sweat evaporate, cooling the skin naturally. Tight or heavy clothing trapped heat and was avoided during field labor. Light-colored fabrics were favored because they reflected sunlight rather than absorbing it. Head coverings played a critical role, shielding the scalp and neck from direct exposure and reducing the risk of heat stroke. These coverings also protected the eyes from glare and dust stirred by dry winds. Fabric weight mattered less than structure. Even heavier cloth could be tolerable if it allowed ventilation and movement. Sleeves and long robes, rather than increasing heat, created layers of air between skin and sun, acting as thermal buffers. Farmers adjusted clothing throughout the day, loosening garments during labor and covering more skin during rest. This adaptability reduced strain on the body and conserved energy. In Damascus, clothing was not passive protection. It was an active tool, shaped by generations of experience to help the human body survive relentless heat. In medieval Damascus, drinking water was treated with discipline rather than impulse. Farmers understood that dehydration was deadly, but they also learned that careless overdrinking during intense labor could weaken the body and disrupt endurance. Instead of consuming large amounts at once, water was taken in small regular sips throughout the day. This steady intake maintained balance and reduced shock to the body under extreme heat. Water was stored with care. Containers were kept in shade or partially buried to preserve coolness, preventing rapid warming under the sun. Clay vessels, which allowed slow evaporation through their walls, helped keep water at a drinkable temperature. Farmers avoided drinking directly from flowing canals during work hours, preferring controlled supplies to prevent illness or exhaustion. Discipline around water extended to timing. Drinking was coordinated with rest periods, especially during midday heat, when the body was most vulnerable. This practice helped prevent collapse and allowed labor to resume safely in the late afternoon. In a climate where water scarcity defined survival, restraint became wisdom. Managing thirst was not about denying the body, but about understanding its limits. Careful hydration turned water into a sustaining force rather than a risky indulgence. Diet in medieval Damascus was shaped by heat as much as by availability. Farmers avoided heavy meals during the hottest parts of the day, knowing that digestion demanded energy the body could not spare under the sun. Daytime food was light and simple, often consisting of fruits, grains, and bread that provided steady nourishment without strain. Fresh produce played an important role. Fruit supplied moisture and natural sugars, supporting hydration while offering quick energy. Grains formed the base of meals, sustaining the body without overwhelming it. Protein-rich or fatty foods were typically reserved for evening when temperatures dropped and digestion became easier. Meal timing followed the same rhythm as labour. Larger meals were eaten after sunset when the body could recover from the day's heat. This allowed farmers to restore strength overnight without risking daytime fatigue. Eating patterns were not random, but refined through generations of experience. In this environment, food was fuel chosen carefully for survival, not comfort. By adapting diet to climate, medieval farmers reduced stress on their bodies and maintained endurance across long, punishing summers. In medieval Damascus, survival in extreme heat depended less on physical strength than on inherited knowledge. Farmers learned from elders who had endured countless summers and understood the subtle signals of land and body. This wisdom was not written but passed through observation, correction, and daily practice. Children absorbed it by working alongside adults, learning when to stop, where to stand, and how to read the sun. Experienced farmers could sense danger before it became visible. Changes in wind, the colour of soil, or the behaviour of animals signalled rising risk. Knowing when heat would intensify allowed workers to withdraw before collapse. Mistakes were unforgiving. Ignoring warning signs could lead to illness, permanent injury, or death far from shade and water. Knowledge also shaped decisions about planting, watering, and rest. Elders taught that endurance came from restraint, not stubborn effort. Young workers were corrected when they pushed too hard or drank carelessly. Over time, experience replaced raw strength as the primary tool of survival. In this world, wisdom functioned as invisible protection. The ability to interpret heat, time, and land preserved life more reliably than muscle. In Damascus, memory and experience were as essential as water. Medieval farmers in Damascus did not conquer the heat. They adapted to it. Survival emerged from acceptance rather than resistance. By adjusting work rhythms, water use, diet, and behaviour, they learned to exist within strict environmental limits. Their endurance was quiet and disciplined, shaped by patience instead of force. This way of life offers a lesson that extends beyond history. In a modern world increasingly affected by extreme heat, the experience of medieval Damascus reminds us that resilience often comes from slowing down rather than accelerating. Knowing when to rest, when to conserve, and when to yield can be as important as innovation. From a personal perspective, this story challenges the idea that survival always requires pushing harder. Sometimes wisdom lies in adaptation, humility, and respect for nature's authority. The farmers of Damascus endured not because they were stronger than the sun, but because they listened to it. Their legacy speaks quietly to our present, urging balance in a warming world.